Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Back to Us by Christi Barth, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Ward Cantrell knew damn well he was being played. He just wished he was wearing a comfortable pants for the occasion. Suits weren't only stiff and scratchy to Ward, they were wrong. Wrong for him, at least. Because today, wearing a classic gray double-breasted suit, Ward felt as ridiculous as when his best friend Casey had stuffed him into a Robin Hood costume for Halloween. But the manager's office at the Seneca Savings and Loan had windows facing the hallway behind the row of tellers. He'd felt every damn eye in the place on him as soon as he walked in the door. So Ward didn't loosen his noose of a tie. He didn't rip off his jacket and toss it in the corner with the ease he'd sunk three-pointers from half court back in the day. And he didn't pace out his nerves and frustration, or his anger at being kept waiting 15 minutes past his scheduled appointment with the manager. There was no bank crisis, no sudden shortage of rolls of quarters. Ward could hear Frank Rogers laughing through the wall, along with the distinctive ping of a microwave timer. Frank's office must be next to the break room. If that walking comb-over came in here smelling of Hot Pockets, Ward might just lose it. Swallowing his pride was hard enough. Wearing a suit pushed him to the limit of his endurance. Seeing greasy-fingered proof that Frank had stalled to finish an afternoon snack, that would send Ward bolting out the door before his string of cuss words finished bouncing off the metal file cabinets. Ward Cantrell? Frank Rogers hustled through the door. The stench of burnt popcorn trailed behind him. The classic reason, among many, that Ward thanked his lucky stars every day he didn't work in a cubicle farm. What are you doing in my bank? The emphasis was slight but noticeable, a slight lean on the words you and my, like Ward was some vagrant that had stumbled into the wrong building. Oh yeah, Ward had known coming here would suck. Frank hated him. But he'd had a stupid, tiny hope that Frank would feel compelled to act professionally at his place of business. Might as well have wished for Santa Claus to drop us a couple of stacks of Ben Franklins down the chimney. You didn't blow your top when begging for a favor, no matter how much a guy pushed your buttons. So Ward kept his reply as cool and smooth as the big lake right outside the window. Like I said when I called for the appointment, I'd like to discuss terms of a loan. Frank pushed his reading glasses up to rest on his forehead, blinked in surprise. For you? Again said with a barely veiled derogatory tone. For your father's farm? Dad had died 3 years ago. The farm had a new name with a huge sign to catch the eye of drivers along the lakeshore, as well as another on the main building. Every last speck of his father's crazy schemes and money-sucking projects were gone. No more alpacas, no more blotchy, disgusting-looking pumpkins he tried to genetically engineer with red and white stripes to sell at Christmas. How damn long would everyone still insist on calling the farm his? I'm checking on the loan application for my business, Lakeside Distillery. Oh, that's right. A sneer lifted one side of his thin lips and turned down the other. You turned it into a booze-making barn. The hypocrisy stank worse than the popcorn. Frank's bulbous red nose, along with the town-wide common knowledge that the man drove his recycling down to Corning so nobody would talk about the number of bottles he went through in a week, proved that Frank had zero moral or ethical aversion to a cocktail, or 20. Beside the biggest business in New York's Finger Lakes, right behind tourism itself, was winemaking. Seneca Lake had 63 wineries circling it. Nobody in this town frowned on the production of alcohol. That's right, Ward tossed Frank's words right back in his face. We make vodka and whiskey from the local grapes. Didn't have the stones to compete with your neighbor's winery? Ward had a lot of feelings about Morrissey vineyards. They mostly centered around the gorgeous red-headed Spitfire Piper Morrissey. A complex jumble of regret, friendship, and a hot need that blasted through him on a daily basis with the strength of a missile. That all fell under personal business, so personal that he locked it away. Not even his best friends knew Ward still held out hope some miracle would bring them back together. When it came to the distillery business, he'd never once been in competition with her family's winery. But he knew one thing for sure. If he'd wanted to spend his life working on a girly, snooty drink like wine instead of the real sock to the gut that whiskey delivered, nothing would have stopped him, especially not the fact that he shared a fence line with an award-winning winery. He had to play the game, though. Take all of Frank's shots and not fire any back. After all, Frank had been taking pot shots at Ward for 10 years now, not to mention mocking his father's failures for a lifetime before that. Ward was used to it. What he wasn't used to was not taking a shot back at the fooling no one come-over. Damn it. Ward folded his hands in his lap, leaned back with a deep breath and a self-assured smile. Seneca Lake's got plenty of wineries already. A nice set of breweries sprang up in the last 10 years, too. Only one distillery. Mine. It's better to be a big fish. Own the whole market instead of trying to elbow my way into a tiny piece. So you're saying you took the easy route? Sure. If you call starting a business from scratch easy. If you call carting into the distillery 50-pound bag after 50-pound bag of rye, barley, and corn for their whiskey, stirring enormous vats of fermenting local grapes for vodka, hunching for hours over the labeling process, sweating every night of the first year, wondering if he'd truly be able to open the tasting room on schedule, or if anyone would come to try something as unique as grape-based vodka once they did open. I'm looking to expand. Ward pushed the black folder he'd balanced on the edge of the desk across the blotter. To be on the safe side, he'd had his business whiz friend Gary look it over. Snazz it up with the kinds of catchphrases money men wet themselves over. As you'll see, I've worked up a long-range projection, included both my current business plan and one amended to include the expansion. Lakeside Distillery has been remarkably successful in the last 3 years, outperforming not only every estimate, but longer established similar businesses. I won't say my expansion is a sure thing. It is, however, a very safe bet. The bank manager didn't bother to look down at the folder, used his letter opener to push it back at Ward like it was a flaming shit-filled paper sack. Banks don't gamble. And if we did, this one would damn sure never gamble on you. Even though he'd more than half expected it, the words were a punch to the gut. Seneca Savings alone was Ward's last shot. All the big institutions had turned him down for not having enough established credit history. Explaining that was because the business was only 3 years old got him sympathy. It hadn't gotten him a loan. Yes, one of the big conglomerates had purchased SS&L last year. All their advertising had still hawked their small-town commitment and heartfelt promises to maintain a special bond with local account holders. So Ward gave it one more try. Look, maybe I used the wrong words. My business is solid, growing. This is an opportunity for you to give a local small business a foot up. We'd both win. There was a time when you knew about winning. Frank raised his voice with every word. It struck Ward that he'd left the door open on purpose, so the whole bank could hear him tear Ward down a notch or 5. This wouldn't just be a no, it'd be a spanking. Frank stood, bent in half to rest his palms on the desk and lean over until he was just inches from Ward's face. So close the ruptured capillaries on his cheeks could be counted as easily as the drinks he racked up on any given night in the Mayhew Manor pub. There was a time when you brought glory to this town. If that Ward Cantrell had asked for a loan, he'd have been proud to service him. But you're not that boy anymore. Now you're the man who brought shame here. For a while, it seemed like all of Seneca Lake still held a grudge against Ward. Time soothed out that anger in a good number of folks, but Frank Rogers never met a grudge he didn't hoard as closely as the money in his vault. Frank, for God's sake, that's old news. Now I'm a respected member of the community. Not respected by all. Not by a long shot. You know all about those, don't you? I'll bet coming here today was a long shot for you. Shouldn't have wasted your time. Piper Morrissey swung around on her stool and to survey the room. The Red Newt Bistro attracted a bit brisk business and tourists, especially with so many sticking around this week after Labor Day. They filled the tables, soaking up a day's worth of wine tasting with charcuterie and bread. But the bar scene was all about the locals. The dead giveaway was the full wall of wine bottles tagged by their owners. The bar itself folded in a zigzag pattern. That configuration made it easy to see everyone lined up with their drinks, nod hello, or even grab your glass and join a friend. Tonight's view enabled her to see a friend, one of her three best friends in the entire world, and one she'd been quietly and occasionally not so quietly fuming at for almost 10 years. Ward Cantrell looked. Piper sucked in a breath. He looked edible just like always. Damn it. Dark stubble halfway between scruff and a goatee lined his jaw. It also highlighted his lips, his kissable lips. She ought to know. Piper had spent hour after hour kissing them, both in reality for that short, amazing time back in high school and to this day in her dreams. No matter how hard she tried to stop them from invading her subconscious, Ward's lips were impossible to ignore even when asleep. Against his thick hair and dark slashes of brow, his blue eyes popped like neon. She remembered how, in the heat of the moment, they'd darkened to the same navy as the faded T stretched taut across his sculpted chest. Because really, one of those Renaissance sculptors dripping with talent couldn't have carved a more godlike and perfectly muscled figure than Ward's. Damn it. His shoulders hunched forward. Forearms on the bar, they circled his beer mug with the same protectiveness she'd seen him use on one of his bottles of small batch whiskey, a lottery ticket that won him the spectacular sum of $100 in their senior year, or a plate of nachos on any given day. To be fair, Piper knew she channeled the same ferociousness when showing off a new pair of Ferragamo pumps to her friends Ella and Casey. Right now, the keep-away pose was being aimed at a woman with blonde hair down to her ass. Great streaky highlights, something Piper envied, as she'd never pull them off with her own red hair. The woman's black platform wedges put her breasts. Something else Piper envied, as she relied on bras to work, well, miracles on her own B-cups, even with Ward's eyes. Yet he didn't even look up from his beer, just shook his head and took a long, steady pull. That was weird. The blonde was low-hanging fruit. Piper couldn't imagine any single man in the whole restaurant turning her away. Ward certainly hadn't turned any woman away since he'd come back to town 3 years ago. She'd give him credit. He took care not to rub the casual encounters in her face, but words still got around. Everything got spread around in Seneca Lake, thanks to their uniquely bizarre lakeshore mailbox journal where everyone spilled secrets. The surly attitude he wore as easily as his faded jeans would scare away strangers, no problem. Not Piper. It might as well be a red cape of challenge flapping in her face. Lifting her voice, she asked, "Should I call for an ambulance?" His head whipped her way faster than a bachelorette party asked for refills during a wine tasting. "Piper?" Ward bolted off his stool and rushed to her side. Ran strong hands down her arms. The heat burned right through the thin cotton of her gray sweater dress. "Are you sick?" In light of his obvious concern, her originally planned snark seemed way out of line. On the other hand, they'd spent 3 years wildly out of balance with each other. No burning reason to swallow her sentence now, aside from how his touch seared right through to her soul. Piper didn't care if she sounded like a bad 80s love song in her head. It was true. Nobody else had to know, but she wouldn't bother lying to herself. So she rolled her shoulders back to twist out of his grip. "The 911 call was for you, Cantrell. I saw you turn away a willing hottie. Figured you had to be hovering on your deathbed to ignore a sure thing like that." "Well, you just gave me a mini heart attack, but otherwise I'm fine." Ward dropped his hands to his sides. "Had a bad day. Didn't feel like any company tonight." "Oh." The brush-off stung, which made Piper toss her head and dial the brightness of her smile up another couple of notches so that he couldn't possibly tell. "Okay, sorry." She pushed the toe of her boot against the wall, swiveling away from him. "Piper." The low rumble of her name coming from his mouth arrested her mid-turn. "That doesn't apply to you. You're not company. You stopped being company the first time I made an emergency tampon run for you during cheerleading practice." Relief at her sassing back with, "What am I then?" A pause. A long pause. Long enough she didn't hear just the riff of the three-piece jazz combo. Long enough, in fact, for her to notice that the bespectacled man with the close-shaved head, maybe recently out of the armed forces, never looked up from the keyboard. In fact, silence reigned long enough for her to identify that the Cool Club of Hector was playing the classic "I Only Have Eyes for You." Wasn't that just her entire weekly dose of irony dropped on her all at once? Because Ward most definitely didn't eye her at all, not in that way. Whereas he was the only man who made her heart race, made her palms sweat, and made her nipples tighten from a single glance. Finally, just when Piper was ready to bolt to escape the tension gathering in the air, Ward lifted one shoulder. "You're Piper." What a cop-out. It had her reaching for her wine with tight lips and an even tighter heart. Seriously, the heart was a muscle, right? Why couldn't it get a Charlie horse? Then he spoke again, so close this time that his breath feathered across her ear in a warm caress. No single label could ever sum you up. God, she tried every single day to ignore the yearning she had for this man, to concentrate on Wart's faults, like the way he wrapped a present more clumsily than a toddler. His idea of dressing up was swapping out a plain flannel shirt for one in plaid. He clammed up and brooded instead of talking out a problem. None of those faults ever lessened her wanting, but she kept trying. Piper was goal-oriented, and getting over Ward Cantrell was a goal she'd been working at for almost a decade. And then he had to go and say something so supremely right. If she hadn't already been sitting, her knees would have wobbled right out from under her. Her hands felt like they should be trembling, but when she picked up her glass, with both hands to be safe, they didn't so much as bobble the thin glass stem. Piper took a sip, winced at the sharp nip to her taste buds, and set it back down. If you didn't want company, why'd you come to a bar? Didn't want to be alone either. He retreated to his empty stool, retrieved his beer, and returned to her side. I'm glad you're here. Piper reminded herself he would have said exactly the same thing if Casey or Ella were there instead of her. The four of them were old friends, best friends. Just because she wanted to read a certain deeper meaning into his words didn't automatically invest them with it. You know me, always happy to help a friend. What are you doing here? You're not the type to hang out alone in a bar. Ward angled sideways, crowding in beside her. I ditched my date. He was, biting her lower lip. Piper tried to think of what to say. Old? Dull? Fat? Not you, she thought. Simple as that. She rubbed the stem of her glass with her palms, turning the liquid inside into a churning sea of red. Not up to my standards. Ah, the famous Morrissey standards. I'll bet if you started dating the president, even he wouldn't live up to your family standards. Well, he's married. Worse yet, he's the wrong party, she joked. Where did you meet this loser? Up at Hobart. The college nestled at the northern tip of Seneca Lake. Ward's eyebrows shot up. He rasped a hand over his cheek. Trolling from them young now, huh? Decided they'd be easier to train if you start before they're even old enough to drink? Since he'd come back to town, they'd fallen into a pattern of being fine when they hung out as a group with Ella and Casey. Mostly fine. Sometimes snippy, but overall fine. The group dynamic was so natural and so important to both of them that they worked hard to maintain the deep friendship. When it was just the two of them, however, the gloves came off. Fast. They jabbed with matching sharpness. Didn't make it hurt any less, though, when Piper was the one on the receiving end. That was a low blow, and utterly uncalled for, might I add. Perhaps you would be better off by yourself tonight. Jesus, I'm sorry. Ward slammed down his beer mug to take her hand. It just came out. I was teasing. I know there's no way you'd go after a college kid. Not in a million years. It was a stupid thing to say. Yes. His thumb rubbed back and forth over the top of her hand in a slow, soothing stroke. I'm really sorry. I swear I didn't mean anything by it. Sincerity roughened. His voice darkened his eyes, put a tiny vertical crease between his eyebrows. Piper believed him. She also believed that it could have just as easily been her jabbing at him too hard. I know. It's okay. And she looked down pointedly at their joined hands, because she couldn't stand him touching her without the right intent for another second. Want to let go, Romeo, because you lost your shot at getting handsy with a woman when you shooed that blonde away. Sorry. The balding man with a soul patch who'd managed to dance with just his upper body while plucking the bass squeezed in on the other side of Piper. He kissed the woman on the next stool long and noisily, then drained half a glass of wine in the single cup. The cute but dopey way she smiled up at him, the easy way their fingers laced together, she blotted his forehead with a napkin, highlighted just how on edge and decidedly uncomfortable Piper and Ward were. Piper was tired of it, tired of only having Ward back in her life halfway, tired of never dropping her guard around him for fear of him poking at her. So she gathered her courage and took a leap. How about we call a truce? Did I miss a declaration of war? No war, definite hostilities, though. Piper waved her blue-tipped nails, which matched the blue diagonal stripe on her dress, as if erasing her words. Not a truce, then. I want us to break a bad habit. We don't smoke. He tapped his mug against her wine glass with a dull clink. You work at a vineyard and I own a distillery. Neither one of us is giving up drinking. Male pattern obtuseness, another fault of Ward's. Not a New Year's resolution type habit, something smaller. I want us to stop sniping at each other, like what just happened, the way I snarked at you earlier about the woman. Neither one of us means it. We don't want to hurt each other. No, we don't. We got into a bad habit a long time ago when we were, Piper searched for the right words. Angry, bitter, hurt, defensive, at odds. We made peace, but we never kicked the habit entirely. You're right. Let's start all over again right now, tonight. For goodness sake, we're 28, but we shouldn't need the buffer of Ella and Casey to force us to behave, not if we're truly best friends. Another long pause. The combo was still on a break, so this time only the din of chatting diners and the clang of silverware against china filled the silence. Piper bit her lower lip. Like most men, Ward hated hashing emotional things out. She'd done all the talking for both of them, but there was still a chance he'd clam up and walk away. Maybe a crowded bar wasn't the best place to delve into dealing with their gnarled history. Maybe she'd pushed too hard. Maybe she'd mistaken the regret she thought she'd seen in his eyes earlier. Maybe. Ward hooked a thumb at the swinging doors to the kitchen. I ordered some bread and dips. They should be out soon. Want to share? A peace offering that would also fill her grumbling tummy. Things were off to a good start. As long as we order a charcuterie board too. I'm hungry. He scowled. You're from upstate New York, not France. Drop the fancy name and call it a plate of meat and cheese. There, normal, friendly banter. She knew they could do it. How long it would last, however, was still to be seen. You pay for it, and I'll call it whatever you like. Ouch. Didn't see that one coming. Ward raised his glass at a toast. Piper responded, but after a half a sip, she pushed her glass back across the bar. I know it's bad luck not to drink after a toast, but I can't let another drop of that assault my tongue. Is it corked? He bent low to sniff at it. No, at least that would be an excuse. It's simply cheap. Poorly executed, poorly balanced, and not left to age nearly long enough before someone rushed it out the door to make a fast profit. Ward pushed it away. So you're saying it's swill? She chose a more elegant way to say the same thing, but yes. More or less. Why'd you order it? I didn't. Your mysterious college boy, he crooked his fingers into air quotes and lifted one corner of his mouth to prove he was joking, is a cheapskate. Precisely. Ward barely cocked his wrist before a bartender scooted down to them. A glass of the Heron Hill Pinot Noir for the beautiful redhead on my left, and add a plate of charcuterie to my order. Piper gaped at him. The wine you ordered. She trailed off, too shocked to continue. He dropped his head back and cracked it in a half circle. Then he scrubbed a hand across his face. Look, I know it's not from Morrissey Vineyards, but if you ask me, I think it makes you look like a douche to drink your own brand in a restaurant. I never order lakeside whiskey or vodka when I'm out, even though it's a far superior product. He finished with a cocky grin. I completely agree. I just can't believe you remembered my favorite brand and varietal. You'd be surprised at how much I remember. Silence hung for a third time, but this time it wasn't awkward or bad. This time it was loaded with innuendo and promise as they stared at each other. The kind of silence they hadn't shared in a very, very long time. Piper wondered if she imagined it. Ward hooked the tip of her finger in the drop off one shoulder's neckline, tugged it half an inch lower. Sexy. You pulled out all the stops for college boy. What happened? Neil and I, drawing a hand across his throat and blowing a raspberry, he cut her off. Stop. Neil? Neil? A name like that? Of course it didn't work out. The name had thrown her at first, too, but it seemed like such a petty reason to turn down a date. A bad name was a grudge to hold against the tasteless parents. With a giggle, she tried to turn into a stern scowl. Piper said, I'm starting over. Zane and I were on campus. This time he held up a hand to cut her off. Sorry, gotta stop you again. It's Professor Buchanan when you're talking about Zane and his job. The guy worked hard to rack up all those degrees on cult stuff. Give him his due. Ward was being playful. The bartender just deposited a fresh glass of wine in front of her. This was already 10 times more delightful than her aborted date. Titles are good. Maybe I should call you that hot guy with bedroom eyes. The waitress placed a basket of crostini and a trio of spreads on the bar. Ward immediately started laying layering tapenade and pimento cheese onto the bread. Piper assumed he was starving until he pushed a filled plate in front of her. God, another utterly sweet gesture that was probably simple courtesy, even though it felt tinged with romance. Neil teaches at Hobart, and I was talking to Zane when I arrived. He was cute, full of compliments, but not in a smarmy way. So when he asked me out, I said yes. Yet you're here with me now. What happened? Did you kick him to the curb because he's got crap taste in wine? If that was a bar I made men live up to, I'd never date again, even here in wine country. No, the problem was that there were 3 people on our date. Me, Neil, and his phone. Thinking back on it, Piper's temper flared once more. He checked it 7 times in the first 5 minutes. Texted, shut off an email, never once apologized or offered up an excuse. He's not a heart surgeon, scheduling a transplant, or a detective tracking down a murderer. The guy teaches classics, Latin of all things. It's a dead language. There are no emergencies in Latin. Yep, she finished at full-on rant volume and could tell her cheeks were heated to a pink that clashed horribly with her red hair. Ward made a multi-dip sandwich out of his bread and shoved it in. Without looking at her, he said, Neil's an idiot. Definitely. Zane was going to get an earful about his colleague. He should warn the entire female faculty and staff to steer far clear of Mr. Self-Absorbed. He's being punished for it. How? Now Ward looked up, shrugged. He doesn't get to spend the night with you. Piper's heart rose up to in their throat. For a couple of seconds, she actually forgot to breathe, until her autonomic nervous system kicked in and had her gasping like a goldfish. I'll be right back. I'm making serious inroads on this pimento cheese. Don't expect much left if you dawdle, he warned as she pushed back from the bar. That was the Ward she was used to. The friend who fought her for the last scone at breakfast. The one who always used his turn on a movie night to force her to watch horror flicks just because it made him laugh when she covered her eyes and shrieked. Once he came back to town, Piper had made a decision to put the past behind them and treat him the way she did Ella and Casey. She could deal with him like that. But their new truce seemed to have flipped a switch in him. Suddenly, he was acting very much like the Ward who stole her heart and became her first love. Piper shoved through the bathroom door and made a beeline to the sink to splash water on her face. Tonight's version of Ward showed glimpses of the man she still loved, but that didn't matter. She didn't dare react, because overshadowing every interaction Piper had with Ward was the memory of how he'd stolen her heart, treasured it, and then shattered it into a million pieces.